So here we are going to go over oogenesis, which is the process in which eggs are produced by a female. Now, when we talk about oogenesis, what's unique to this process is that it actually starts while the fetus is still in utero. If we compare that to male gamete production, which is known as spermatogenesis, that will start after the male has been born. But for females, it will begin in utero. And the process starts with oogonia. So we will have several oogonia, which will undergo mitosis and essentially proliferate to produce millions of oogonia. Now, what's really unique to oogonia is that they are known as germ cells, and they have the ability to undergo both mitosis and meiosis. So here, first, they will undergo mitosis and produce millions of oogonia. But what happens is that those millions of oogonia will not survive, and most of them will actually undergo apoptosis, which is known as programmed cell death, and will be left with thousands of oogonia instead of millions of oogonia. And now those thousands of oogonia will undergo differentiation to become a primary oocyte. Now we are a oocyte, we are no longer a oogonia. So the oogonia was that germ cell that can undergo mitosis and meiosis. But this oocyte is not a germ cell, and it cannot undergo both mitosis and meiosis. It can only undergo one of those processes, and it's going to undergo meiosis. So once we are at that primary oocyte, it's going to begin meiosis. And remember, this is still happening in utero. So the female fetus is inside the womb and it is still developing. And that primary oocyte will actually arrest in prophase 1. It will not complete meiosis 1, it will arrest in prophase 1. Remember, meiosis has two parts. There's meiosis 1 and there's meiosis 2, and this primary oocyte will arrest in prophase 1 of meiosis 1. Now, a way we can remember that is that primary oocyte, primary starts with a P, it will arrest in prophase, which also starts with a P. Also, it will resume meiosis when the female reaches puberty, which also starts with a P. So primary oocytes will arrest in prophase 1 until they reach puberty. When they reach puberty, the primary oocyte will be able to complete meiosis 1. And when it completes meiosis 1, instead of producing two cells, it will produce a larger cell and a smaller cell. That smaller cell is referred to as a polar body, and that larger cell is referred to as our secondary oocyte. Now, we need to compare and contrast this with regular meiosis for a second. So in regular meiosis, we will see once meiosis 1 has occurred, we will see two cells. And then once meiosis 2 has occurred, we will see a total of 4 cells. But in oogenesis, we do not see 4 final eggs. Instead, we will end up with only 1 egg because we want to retain most of that cytoplasm because it's going to be really important for zygote growth and development later on. So when we cleave this cell in each round of meiosis, it's not going to be symmetrical cleavage to yield 2 identical cells. Instead, that cleavage will produce 1 larger cell and 1 smaller cell. That smaller cell is called a polar body, which will eventually go and die off. So, going back to oogenesis, we are now at the secondary oocyte. And this secondary oocyte, it's completed meiosis 1, and now it's going to go on to enter meiosis 2. But when it enters meiosis 2, it's going to arrest once again, and it's going to arrest in metaphase 2. And it is going to stay arrested in metaphase 2 until fertilization occurs. So remember that within females, each menstruation cycle, there is an egg released. And that egg is released. If fertilization occurs, it will be able to complete meiosis 2 and become the matured ovum. And once again, another polar body will be produced instead of two cells. So after fertilization, you get that mature ovum. And that is essentially the process of oogenesis. You start off with germ cells, which proliferate into millions of germ cells, but those germ cells, most of them actually die off. Once they die off, whatever you're left with will differentiate into primary oocytes. The primary oocytes will arrest in prophase 1 until the female reaches puberty, and then they will complete meiosis 1 to become a secondary oocyte. And all of those secondary oocytes, one egg will be released each month, and if fertilization occurs, then we will see the completion of meiosis 2 and reach that mature ovum. And that is oogenesis.